You know, the longer I've lived, the more convinced I've become of one simple truth. Most people don't think, they imitate. They think they're making decisions, but what they're really doing is copying the emotional tone of the room. I've watched it for nearly a century, on trading floors, in boardrooms, and universities. The same pattern, over and over. A crowd forms, a story spreads, and before long everyone's convinced that this time it's different. Except it never is. The faces change, the fashions change, the assets change, but the psychology, it's identical. Humans are herd animals, trying desperately to look individual. And it's that gap between what we think we are and what we actually are that destroys wealth, careers, and peace of mind. Today I want to talk to you about how to avoid that. Not with buzzwords, not with optimism, but with rational clarity. Because if you can learn to think independently, truly independently, you'll outperform 99% of people in markets and in life. Here's the thing. Herd behavior isn't stupidity. It's survival instinct. Thousands of years ago, being alone meant being dead. When the tribe ran, you ran too. And if you hesitated, you became lunch. That same wiring still lives inside you. When everyone around you is euphoric, your brain releases dopamine. When everyone panics, it releases cortisol. The result, you feel safety in numbers, not safety in logic. Now, in the stock market, that's lethal. When prices rise, people feel smart. When prices fall, they feel stupid. But intelligence doesn't fluctuate with market cycles. Emotion does. To be rational is to go against your own evolution, and that's hard. But that's also what separates thinkers from followers. The crowd isn't evil, it's just lazy. Thinking hurts, conforming feels good. But every dollar I ever made came from doing what hurt short term and made sense long term. Objectivity is the rarest resource on earth. People claim they want truth, but they actually want reassurance. To think independently, you must be willing to accept reality even when it insults your ego, especially when it insults your ego. Objectivity and rationality require independence of thought, and that independence means you'll often feel alone. If you can't tolerate that loneliness, you'll never reach objectivity. The more minds you borrow, the less clarity you own. So how do you build objectivity? You train yourself to see what's there, not what you wish were there. You measure, you compare, you verify. And most of all, you shut up and think before you speak. Independent thinking requires tools. You can't just try harder. You need a framework that forces clarity. That's why I built what I call a lattice work of mental models. Each model is a lens from a different discipline: psychology, physics, economics, biology, history, mathematics. Most people think within their profession. An engineer sees systems. A psychologist sees behavior. An economist sees incentives. But reality doesn't divide itself that neatly. So when you combine models, you start seeing the connections that others miss. The crowd can't do that. They see only headlines. You see systems. That's independence. Independent thinking will make you lonely. That's inevitable. When you refuse to join every bandwagon, people call you stubborn. When you sit quietly during hysteria, they call you arrogant. And when your calm turns out to be right, they call you lucky. Ignore them all. The price of independence is discomfort, but the reward is clarity. And clarity compounds just like capital. If you want comfort, join the herd. If you want freedom, walk alone. Because in the end, the market doesn't pay you for comfort. It pays you for correctness. So as we start this journey, remember, herd mentality is ancient programming. Independence is learned behavior. You can't eliminate the instinct to conform, but you can override it. Because once you think clearly, you'll realize something profound. You don't need to be smarter than the crowd. You just need to be less emotional than the crowd. And that, my friends, is the real secret of independent thinking. The new generation of geniuses coming for their jobs. But the real battle isn't out there. It's in here, inside your mind. Every day you're in a silent fight between reason and impulse, between clarity and noise, between the thinker and the animal. And let me tell you, it's the toughest war you'll ever fight. Because your biggest enemy isn't the herd. It's the part of you that wants to join the herd. The craving to fit in, the fear of missing out, the ego that wants to prove it's right. That's what kills independence. Everyone thinks the goal is to outsmart others. It's not. The goal is to outdiscipline yourself. I said it before. A great business at a fair price is better than a fair business at a great price. But here's the unspoken part. That kind of clarity only comes when your emotions aren't hijacking your mind. Temperament is your fortress. It protects you from yourself. You can't be rational part-time. You can't demand logic when markets fall and abandon it when they rise. Most people don't lose because they lack intelligence. They lose because they can't stay consistent when it matters most. When panic hits, they sell. When greed rises, they buy. They mistake noise for opportunity and emotion for insight. But emotion is the opposite of insight. If you can master the ability to not react, to stay calm when the room burns, you'll outperform 99% of the herd. Warren and I built Berkshire Hathaway not by being smarter, but by being calmer. When others shouted, we waited. When they bought excitement, we bought sanity. That's not genius, that's discipline. You don't need faster reflexes. You need a stronger filter. The real skill is patience under pressure, keeping your reason stable while the world vibrates around you. Let's talk about the new monster, attention. In my lifetime, I've seen the cost of distraction multiply 1,000-fold. You're being bombarded. Tweets, headlines, gurus, panic loops, trend charts. Every bit of noise pulls you closer to the herd's emotion and further from your own clarity. You think you're informed, but you're actually just overstimulated. The difference between knowledge and noise is digestion. Information without reflection is junk food for the mind. It fills you, but it doesn't nourish you. I used to tell young investors, you don't have to swing at every pitch. In a world of infinite noise, that advice is now survival. Every alert, every update, every opinion, they're designed to make you react. But reaction is the herd's language. So here's a better habit. Instead of asking, what should I do? Ask, what can I ignore? Your future depends less on what you chase and more on what you resist. Everyone wants speed, faster trades, faster decisions, faster success. But you know what speed kills? Reflection. And without reflection, you're just running faster towards stupidity. One of my rules in life is simple. Never make an important decision when you're emotional or rushed. If it's urgent, it's probably wrong. That's how the herd operates. Emotional immediacy. Someone says the market's crashing, and suddenly everyone's making split-second decisions on lifetime capital. You want to think independently? Slow down. Take one deliberate breath before you act. Force a pause. The smartest people I've ever known had one thing in common. They were slow thinkers, not lazy, deliberate. They knew that real clarity doesn't come from more data. It comes from more distance. The slower you think, the clearer you see. I've often said that the stock market is a device for transferring money from the impatient to the patient. But that's true of life too. Everything valuable compounds slowly: reputation, knowledge, relationships, credibility. The problem is the herd can't wait. The average person overestimates what they can do in a year and underestimates what they can do in a decade. Impatience is the modern disease. It makes people chase shortcuts that don't exist. Patience isn't passive, it's strategic restraint. It's the discipline to let opportunity come to you instead of forcing it. When you wait with preparation, you build asymmetry, a small number of right decisions that matter more than hundreds of rushed ones. And that's the essence of independence: less motion, more meaning. One of the most dangerous things in life is thinking you understand something you don't. It's not ignorance that hurts you, it's false confidence. The world is full of people with opinions, but very few with comprehension. They read headlines and mistake them for research. They memorize buzzwords and call it wisdom. That's why, to think independently, you must learn to doubt yourself correctly. You must ask, how do I know this? What's the evidence? Am I sure? The crowd never asks that. They outsource certainty to whoever sounds confident. And confidence without competence is the perfect recipe for disaster. I've said it before. Knowing what you don't know is more useful than being brilliant. So before you add information, remove illusion. Cut away everything you think you know but can't verify. That's how clear thinking begins, not with addition, but with subtraction. Now let's talk about one of the most powerful psychological biases that keep people trapped in the herd: social proof. Humans assume that if many people believe something, it must be true. That's great if you're crossing a busy street. It's terrible if you're investing in markets or making life decisions. When everyone starts shouting, "You've got to get in now," that's usually the time to step back. I remember the dot-com mania. Every dinner conversation in America turned into a pitch meeting for a company with no profits. If you questioned it, you were the fool. But truth doesn't care how many people believe a lie. It just waits patiently to be noticed. Independent thinking means you stop using popularity as a proxy for truth. Just because the crowd applauds something doesn't mean it's right. And just because you're alone doesn't mean you're wrong. Social proof is emotional anesthesia. It numbs you into obedience. But once you feel that pull, once you hear yourself saying everyone's doing it, that's your cue to pause. Because wisdom never begins with everyone. Another reason people follow the herd is authority bias, the tendency to believe something just because an expert said it. Now, don't misunderstand me. I love expertise. But expertise without humility is dangerous. I've seen entire financial systems crumble because people blindly followed credentials instead of logic. They thought if the economists say it's safe, it must be. No, it mustn't. The laws of physics don't bend for professors, and the laws of economics don't care about PhDs. When authority replaces reasoning, independence dies. A title doesn't make truth. Evidence does. So I follow a simple rule. Listen to everyone. Believe only data. If the evidence and logic are sound, I'll agree, even if it comes from a janitor. If they're weak, I'll disagree, even if it comes from a Nobel laureate. That's the essence of independent thinking. Respect everyone. Trust no one blindly. Humans also have a deep need to appear consistent. Once we make a decision publicly, we want to defend it, even if it's killing us. That's called commitment and consistency bias. We'd rather double down on a bad idea than admit we were wrong, because admitting error feels like loss of identity. The herd thrives on this. Everyone keeps repeating the same narrative, not because it's true, but because changing it would be embarrassing. I've learned to love saying, I changed my mind. That phrase has made me more money and peace than any investment formula. If you want to understand why crowds behave irrationally, look at incentives. Show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome. People don't act based on truth. They act based on a reward. And when incentives align around hype, greed, or fear, the herd follows instantly. That's why bubbles happen. Everyone's incentivized to keep the fantasy alive. The analysts get bonuses. The media gets clicks. The public gets hope. Independent thinkers trace the money. They ask who benefits if this idea is believed. That question alone will protect you from 90% of modern nonsense. So whenever you hear someone confidently selling a dream, don't analyze the story first. Analyze the incentive. Once you know what's being rewarded, you'll understand why the herd is dancing. Then you can use what I call the lattice work of mental models. When I evaluate a business, I don't just think, is it profitable? I ask from psychology, how does this business exploit human bias? From economics, how durable are its incentives and pricing power? From biology, how adaptable is it to change? From engineering, where are the system bottlenecks? From history, have similar models failed before? By cross-checking ideas across disciplines, I filter out illusion faster than others. The crowd studies outcomes. The thinker studies mechanisms. That's how judgment lasts decades, not weeks. Independent thinking isn't a single act. It's a lifetime discipline. Every rational decision adds a brick to your internal structure of judgment, and that structure compounds. You don't need 1,000 insights. You just need a few that you never forget. Every time you resist a bias, pause before reacting, or choose truth over popularity, you're strengthening your framework. That's how conviction is built. That's how wisdom compounds quietly while the herd chases excitement. Thinking independently isn't just a skill, it's a responsibility. Because once you see clearly, you can no longer pretend not to. The world runs on borrowed conviction. People are desperate for those who can stand still while everything shakes. If you can be that person, calm, reasoned, unshaken, you'll become invaluable, not just in business, but in every area of life. And that's the paradox of independence. It starts in solitude, but ends in leadership. Because when everyone else is lost in noise, the quiet thinker becomes the compass. So keep sharpening that mind, keep challenging yourself, and remember, clarity is the ultimate wealth. You know, people spend their entire lives chasing wealth, but very few ever stop to ask, why do I want it? I'll tell you something most of the world never figures out. Money doesn't buy happiness. It buys independence. That's why I admired Lord Keynes when he said he wanted to be rich, only so he could think without constraint. That's the same reason I wanted it. The ability to wake up in the morning and say, I will do exactly what makes sense to me, not what pleases others. That's real freedom. The crowd doesn't understand this. They chase status symbols and call it success. But success without independence is just slavery in a nicer suit. You see, the point isn't to own more, it's to owe less, not just in money, in obligations, expectations, and emotional debts. Wealth, in its highest form, is mental freedom, and you can't have that if your thoughts are leased to public opinion. If I could delete one emotion from the human mind, it would be envy. Envy is the silent engine of herd mentality. It makes people want what others have, not because they need it, but because someone else has it first. I once said it's not greed that drives the world, but envy. And that's truer now than ever. Social media turned envy into entertainment. Everyone's performing success, and everyone else is quietly miserable because of it. But here's the trick. Envy always blinds judgment. The moment you compare, you lose objectivity. The moment you chase someone else's definition of success, you lose direction. Independent thinking begins when you stop asking, who's ahead, and start asking, what's right for me? The herd measures by position. The thinker measures by progress. And that difference changes everything. There's a word I've always loved, enough. It's the word that separates the rich from the enslaved. Because no matter how much money you make, if you never know what enough looks like, you'll always be poor. I've seen billionaires with no peace, forever running, comparing, proving. And I've seen modest people with serenity because they knew when to stop. Enough isn't complacency, it's mastery. It's the realization that freedom lives beyond the threshold of excess. The crowd doesn't understand this either. They confuse growth with progress, movement with meaning. They believe the next acquisition, the next house, the next win will finally make them feel complete. But the truth is, if you're not content with a little, you won't be content with a lot. Independence begins when you stop needing more to feel secure. Because once you hit enough, you can finally focus on what really compounds: wisdom, peace, and reputation.